Hello and welcome to an episode of the Manufacturing News Podcast with me, Mark Bracknell, Managing Director of Theo James Recruitment. Today, we're welcoming on Kieran Wood, the General Manager of Tiger Lifting. Kieran is someone I've spoken to many times over the years, so I couldn't wait to have him on the show. And we talked about all things supply chain and logistics. And in particular, an area Kieran is extremely passionate about, and that is data. Arming yourself with the right data to make better informed decisions, improve efficiencies, reduce lead time, and just generally getting the new age of manufacturing and engineering. We talk about all things data. We talk about the challenges in supply chain and manufacturing right now. We talk about the future and our predictions of what it looks like. And this is just generally an episode where if you are passionate about a supply chain or you want to know a little bit more about supply chain logistics, then you will enjoy this episode. So please sit back, listen, enjoy, whether you watch or listen. Please just do me the honor of just clicking that like and subscribe button. It really helps me grow the channel. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoy the episode. Excellent. Right, a massive warm welcome today to Kieran Wood, the General Manager of Tiger Lifting. How are we, Kieran? How are we doing? You all right?
I'm good, thanks, Mark. How are you?
Very good, thank you, Kieran. Very good. I'm looking forward to this one. I'm looking forward to learning a lot about the supply chain and logistics world. But before I do that, the first question is the same question I ask everyone. What does it mean to you, Kieran, to be a leader, would you say?
Ooh. I think it's understanding the impact you have on people. Do you know, the people of your team, the people that you interact with, and of course the people in the businesses that you're working for. You know, you're there to kind of deliver their strategic ambitions. You're there to, develop and nurture your team. So I think for me, it's that has a massive impact. It's an old saying, you spend more time with your boss than you do with your family.
Yeah.
So choose wisely, So yeah, I think it's kind of realizing that impact that you have on people.
Yeah. Have you ever felt that level of responsibility? What do you say? Because that's something that sometimes people don't realize until they're in the job, and then they actually feel it.
Oh yeah, you still feel it. Supply chain's a strange animal. It probably doesn't get the recognition it deserves. It kind of warrants in terms of business structure, but it has a lot more kind of variables. And 1 minute you're dealing with a container blockage, so you've got your various stakeholders shouting for their materials or whatever, the impact you have on customer plans. But you've got to remember as well, the people that you're on your team, they're coming in, they're trying to do a good job, and it's kind of having that kind of foresight to say, listen, I know things aren't ideal, but how do we get a win-win for everybody? And kind of sometimes as well as kind of motivating your staff after a difficult day, after you've had difficult conversations. It's kind of cheering them up when, tomorrow's a new day. We've had a bad day today. Let's move on from that and, get after the next day.
Yeah, you have to be the one often leading from the front, don't you? And sometimes when you don't feel like geeing people up, unfortunately, it's part of the gig. But it's just that's why there probably is no harder job than management. I want to take it very briefly back before we ask some questions on the supply chain piece, so people can learn from the stuff you do. Very briefly, Kieran, what led you to getting into manufacturing? Because am I right in saying you started early doors with British Engines, obviously a very well-established group up here?
Yeah. So, back in the 90s, it was probably the biggest industry in the Northeast. The shipyards were still going to an extent, admittedly declining. But it was seen as a kind of a stable industry. Spent 5 years with the division of British Engines, making access platforms. Fortunately made redundant and stayed in manufacturing, but not as much in engineering, but in production roles.
Right.
And probably like 99% of supply chain people drifted into logistics, and 27 years later, still learning new things every day. So it's there's in the Northeast, there's some great businesses, established businesses, and they're still finding new problems. There's still new problems for professionals to resolve. Still new opportunities for businesses, and it's not probably the last 10 years what kind of motivated us to move back into manufacturing after a spell with print management was the rate of change in industry. Industry 4.0 was just being spoken about. We've developed with MRP, ERP, digital twins, and that's kind of that just opened up new possibilities, and that's kind of led to kind of where I am today, and the kind of things that I do.
And what you mentioned, the changes there, and I agree. I mean, I think I've worked this industry now for 15, 16 years, and I think over the last 5 years, I've seen the supply chain logistics world just suddenly become so prominent. Probably because there's probably been more development, but also issues than ever before, and companies have had to lean on their supply chain to help now. What would you say is the biggest change from now to when you first started?
The use of data.
Okay.
Before it was, and it still is very relationship based.
Yep.
Everything was, we dealt with this companies providing a good service. The cost of changing is more than you'll get back in terms of benefit. Everything was very anecdotal. Now the scale in terms of number of stock keeping units a business keeps, the number of industries a business operates and markets a business operates, it's progressed from that. With computer systems that gives people access to a lot of data, but people need to be able to interpret the data. What does that data tell them? You talk about the last probably 5 years or so in supply chain and its prominence, but this data for the last 5 years, how do businesses interpret that? Because since COVID, there's been shutdowns, shortages. Even in 2021, 22, there was still shutdowns in Asia. So the data will tell you one picture, but it's having the people with the experience to say, yeah, well, sales were that year in July, but that was pent up demand because of shutdowns, etc. in these periods. So we need to be able to kind of smooth out that lumpy demand and kind of use that for forecasting. But it's people skills, it's people with that market knowledge, it's people with that subject domain knowledge, people who can take that data and interrogate it. And that's the difference now. Is it's a lot more data driven, and it's a lot more traditionally crunching numbers. That previously our finance guys would crunch the numbers that tell you you're spending too much in this area, you're spending too much in that area, this is what we need to do. Now we're going to the finance guys to say, listen, we're holding too much inventory, sales aren't being met, it's leading to increased inventory, it's having an issue on cash flow for businesses. Operationally, these are our challenges. This is, I think, it should be our strategic plans. This is where I think we should target investment. These are the markets we should target. Its supply chain now is much more strategic, and that's become enabled by the technology. Before it was traditionally just a cost center.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that, isn't it? Because I've had quite a few people on here on the supply chain side who've talked in depth about that relationship piece, which is obviously you've said yourself, it's still so important, to lean on suppliers and relationships. But we've not really talked that much on here about that data piece, which I think is interesting. And I think actually it lends itself to just the way manufacturing as a whole is going, isn't it? And you look at the change of skills that people still need to be good at building relationships and dealing with people, but actually they need to do that whilst analyzing data, which pleases me in a way because that doesn't necessarily fit the narrative that people are going to be replaced by automation. It fits narrative that people will just work hand in hand and make better results and make better decisions based on that, which I think is fascinating. I think it's exciting for the industry personally. If you were going into a business for the first time and they had none of this, it was relatively old school. It was like exactly what you said there. All the finance people decided everything based on their numbers. It was just on very traditional relationships for suppliers they've had for 15, 20 years. What would be the first things you would look at in a business or advise them to do so on the data piece? What do you say?
It's understanding your processes. I think your first step in any kind of digitalization journey is understanding your processes, understanding your business, because ultimately once you start capturing data, it'll ask a lot of questions of you. So you need to understand, product A has sat here for 45 minutes. Why? Do you know what I mean? Yeah, because that's your bottleneck work center. That work center, there's a queuing time, there's a setup time. It's arguably being able to understand at what point should data be collected, what's the right data to collect, and then obviously then the pieces, once you've done that pieces, then how do we collect it and what do we do once we've started collecting that.
What would you say when you go into a business? The common pitfalls, I would say, in terms of they might be collecting the wrong data entirely, or what for you do you think are the most important things to look at to make a positive change?
I think it's revisiting that process piece. I can't speak enough about processes, because that underpins everything.
Yeah.
It's your people and your processes depend on decide your profitability. Sometimes people haven't revisited the process for a long time, so the understanding of that process. So it has to be a repeating cycle all the time of auditing processes. Is that process still current? Is it still relevant? Is it still the right thing to do? And then kind of giving your teams ownership as well of the process.
Yeah.
Because I think the biggest thing is you find is the biggest failure of any implementation or any project to kind of drive efficiencies is a lack of engagement. Getting the people in as well. Sometimes it's a guy that's doing a job every day that understands the little intricacies, the details. That's the difference between buying a piece of technology that's going to give you 7% productivity gains or a £400,000 piece of machinery that's going to collect dust in the corner of your factory.
Yeah.
That's the importance of the kind of people and processes. And that's why it has to be kind of a repeating cycle. So bottom, top down, and then bottom back up, kind of like a pyramid scheme, like a kind of pyramid. So top down from your strategy and bottom up on delivery of that. And that, I think that for me is the best way of combining both aspects. The strategic piece from the C-suite, the senior leadership team, and the business knowledge of the people on the front line doing the job every day. The people that have made the adaptations over the last 10 years deliver a quality product. That there is what's going to be the difference between success and failure in a project.
Is there almost a good place to start? Because, like you said there, half the battle will be trying to bring people on the journey with you. And, this is the way we've always done it, so why should we change? Is there almost like a starter kit for, a 75, 80 strong manufacturing business who really just isn't on board yet or doesn't have that sort of mentality, shall we say?
It's about having that vision. Why do we need to change?
Yeah.
Don't start with the solution in mind. Start with the problem.
Mm-hmm.
This is why we need to change. Because of rising costs, we're no longer competitive in these markets. How do we address that? It might be a case of getting the next level down of management to kind of be involved, to own their departments, to get more brainstorming together, and then they're responsible as kind of evangelists to sell the changed in, to say this is the benefits it's got. We're not going to replace you.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't done to replace you. This is done to be able to do more with what we've got. This is going to enable us to grow to the next level, to be able to compete, to guarantee jobs and drive growth.
Yeah.
Because people ultimately are suspicious. It's about human nature. We're not going to, it's kept alive for thousands of years. You know what I mean? It's not. We can't change that. We're not going to change that overnight. So it's about showing them as what's achievable.
Apologies for interrupting this episode with a very quick announcement about my business. Theo James are a specialist talent provider specifically to the manufacturing and engineering sector. I'm incredibly proud of what we've achieved since our inception in 2015. We specialize in roles from semi-skilled trades right the way up to our TJ exec search arm of the business, both from the contract and permanent side. We offer both bespoke one-off campaigns for hard-to-fill roles or a full partnership service where we become an extension of your business. For any information, please get in touch with me or the team. I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. Thank you.
Taking some of their biggest bugbears and getting some quick wins and show them how this was done based on listening to them. If we can take this away, that allows you to focus on more value-added work, stuff which will give you job enrichment and drive the company on, and able to reach into new markets. With that comes new teams. That gives people an opportunity to move into leadership roles. So, yeah, I think it's like I say, it's that culture piece.
Yeah, interesting. And if you're an MD, a director of business or you are in charge of the budget, shall we say, and you need some convincing, how expensive can this be to start the journey of, bringing that digital art to their business? Because obviously, like you said, some of the machines and processes are quite eye-watering, and right now we're probably going to be in the hardest manufacturing market I've ever seen personally, with the costs getting way out of control. So what, if you were sat in front of MD and you had to convince them to start that journey in this climate, what would your first thing you would say, would you say?
It's about having that kind of review of the current business, kind of how the business is operating model now.
Yeah.
Where can we engage the teams to review current processes, to map them out, to look at that kind of value stream mapping piece. Start with that, engage the teams, and then you've got some numbers. You can turn around and say, current process, the cumulative lead time is 19 days. We're not winning work or having to put overtime on because the customer wants 14 days. we can take these 5 days out as part of our standard operating model that reduces the overtime and enables you to win, to be more successful with work. So, you're able to paint numerically, you're able to give some numbers on the impacts of that. You've got an 80% quote conversion rate, and that last 20% is due to the lead time not being correct. That's a 20% potential 20% uplift in revenue with that operating profits. You've got an overtime bill because you're not scheduling work properly because you haven't reviewed your thing. Overtime bills for companies can be significant, especially when the more skilled labor you've got and the more you're paying. You want to be able to try and pay a better standard rate and not rely on overtime. And so that's, for me, is how you get them build them quick wins, paint a picture quickly on what's the value add from this, and then it's in light of what the value stream map is thrown out, what's the best kind of solution to get you started on that journey.
Okay.
Because SAP isn't going to be the best solution for a 30-strong machine shop. But there's a lot of small businesses offering adaptable solutions that, with a smaller barrier to entry, that'll give people them options and enable them to start on that kind of transformation piece, embed the ways of working in with the team, so that when they do grow and they are ready to evolve further, the culture piece isn't as difficult because people have been working this way, albeit to a smaller scale, over the last 2 to 5 years.
I know a lot of people talk about lead time production, how critical that is. I hear that a lot in the industry. What role do you think that plays in the sort of reducing costs and sort of improving efficiency, I guess, with a manufacturing business?
Honestly, because of consumer habits, we all want everything today.
Yeah.
If we don't get next day delivery, chances are we're not going to buy something from an online platform. And businesses work the same in that. Lead time reduction forces you to look at your processes. It forces you to look at your inventory. Inventory is one of the biggest capital costs that any business has got. It's one of the biggest impacts to cash flow. Traditionally we're going, wow, it's a small cost. We'll just get loads of stock. But as products develop, obsolescence gets bigger. You can't use the same methods because ultimately it's tying up too much capital, and at the end of the year you've got too big a write-off for stock that you're no longer moving, that you've either got a discount or dispose of. So it really focuses it, because if you can take 10 days out your lead time, that's 10 days of on-hand stock you can take out of your process. You don't need, you've streamlined your inventory as a function of your lead time. So if you can reduce your lead time, you can reduce the amount of inventory you need to hold, both in component pieces and in finished goods. Then you extend that through to your supply chain, working with your first tier suppliers to reduce their lead time into you. So then your safety stocks, you can further reduce the safety stocks. That enables you to free up capital to invest in growth. Most small businesses I know would rather have £100,000 tied up in a machine which is going to generate revenue than £100,000 of slow moving stock that they're going to have to discount or write off at the end of the year.
Yeah, makes sense. What are your predictions? Because we mentioned there in terms of before, COVID, a good example, and supply chain logistics, it's just been so up and down and volatile, I guess. We even saw that on the volume side, post-COVID, we saw a massive spike of businesses needing planners, buyers, and suddenly they were concentrating on that stock piece. And then we saw it dip. And we saw it dip for quite some time. And now it's probably slowly but surely back on the radar for most businesses. But as we mentioned before, there are so many issues right now with costs, competition, delays, all these sort of stuff now, which is affecting businesses being able to import, export, and just affecting the whole supply chain logistics piece as it, in its entirety. What would you say? What trends are you seeing, and where do you see the next sort of few years going in the industry, you think?
I think probably you're seeing it in the US now, the look to reshoring. I think you will see a contraction of some markets, where reshoring becomes the norm for a lot of industries. UK is blessed, and we've got some very specialized engineering industries, which we're very strong competitively in. But from a consumer, like consumer goods, etc., I think you will see market shrinkage. So, companies that traditionally spent a lot more export, I think that them revenues will kind of reduce, and the domestic market will become more prevalent. Mm-hmm. And then obviously that puts a different strain on last mile logistics, and is there enough capacity in the UK network? Which one of the biggest problems that we're going to see that we're seeing now is in the haulage system. There's a lot of carriers kind of going out of business due to costs. I think you're going to see a kind of pendulum swing, because I think it's going to get to the point where costs have been squeezed that much, operators are going out of business, then you're going to be left with a small capacity in the network, which is going to drive costs back up. You're going to see that, you've seen it during COVID with freight container prices going, three and a half times the price that it previously was due to supply and demand. You're not going to see that swing in domestic haulage, but I think you will see a significant swing once kind of you've had a settling of businesses which are being able to like sustainable businesses, and then what their ability to charge in the market is. And currently you've got an abundance of you've had an abundance of people where companies have invested in vans to clear a backlog brought on by COVID, Brexit. Brexit led to a lot of stockpiling. Mm-hmm. In the end of 2019, when nobody knew what the relationship was going to be. Haulage networks has grown massively then. Now, people have been bidding low cost on work to keep wagons moving in the hope that they'll become the work will become more profitable over time. A lot of people that fortunately it hasn't been successful for them. So that for me, I think will be one of the biggest issues that you have over the next couple of years is domestic network capacity.
Yeah, interesting. It's so interesting enough. We running an event with Durham University. It's all about part of it will be about building resilient supply chains, but we wanted to talk about the challenges in the market. And interestingly, when we put the options out to people, supply chain professionals, overwhelmingly they said the biggest challenge right now is costs. That's the biggest challenge, bar one, and how you manage it, which is tricky, isn't it? Because obviously it's quite multifaceted. That the costs, all manufacturing costs, and all the hike in minimum wage and national insurance contributions. That's gonna just hit, and it is. We're seeing it now hit manufacturing businesses, but when they talk about the challenge of costs, I'm presuming that is also because everyone is passing costs on, and I imagine that's a bit of a headache as well on the supply chain piece, plus import export costs and all that coupled with that. It just seems to be everything at once, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah. Well, you talk about the increase in the minimum wage, and it's really, really difficult because it's a double-edged sword where we want to be able to pay people. You want to be able to pay people more.
Yeah.
But there needs to be a piece by leaders to be able to ensure that increase is done with a value add. Because if it's just a cost that's going to be passed on to customers with no improvements in efficiencies, with no change in the current model, that's not sustainable. Because if a company's wage bill is 30% of their total of their costs, and they get a 10% increase in that based on minimum wage and national insurance contributions, best will in the world, they're going to pass a 3% price increase onto the end customer, which is another manufacturing business or retailer, which is going to make them uncompetitive with businesses which are more streamlined and more efficient. Government needs to be kind of mindful is that there's a development piece around the workforce that needs to be done, because in the current climate, unless that development piece is put in place, that will kind of rise in automation. It makes the return on investment bigger. So we need to make sure that whilst labour costs are rising, that's probably going to make the break-even point for automation lower. So we need to make sure that we're developing our teams in that's both on an organisational level and on a national level, to be able to move with the times, to move with the shift in industry. How do the guy who was previously on the production line, he then becomes working with a cobot, for instance, on packaging, whatever, routine maintenance, or running a cell and taking that data in to say, is the shift performing how we expect it to be? And it's about, there's a big piece round in it, and it's massively multifaceted, as you say. There's a cost, is that businesses want to be able to pay people more, but it needs to be done within the constraint of there's an end price which people are prepared to pay for a product. So everybody needs to be kind of mindful of where we are going over the next 2 to 10 years, probably.
Yeah, 100%. And you make a valid point there as well about, we also need to attract people to the sector. The future of manufacturing is one of the biggest challenges is because there's not enough good people coming through. And the minimum wage increase, I don't think does that, because it's a minimum wage increase. So those same people at that level could still be working now in hospitality and so on and so forth, or something less stressful for that same salary. But there needs to be a way to attract people to this. I might have been naive and optimistic here, but if you link all this in with that data piece, I've got kids and they are obsessed with iPads and technology, and does that lend itself now? The fact that if you look at a professional within logistics supply chain, we need to bring people on who are good at building relationships. So there's that customer service piece and confidence piece, but actually that is now coupled with the fact that they're going to be working with technology and data, which I actually think the new generation would much prefer. Do you see that, or am I just being naive?
No, that's you're going to have, in the US, in Japan, you have supply chain engineers.
Yeah.
The engineer, it's industrial engineering expanded outside the four walls of a factory. And that's going to get bigger and bigger because the numbers involved, and that massively changes the people requirements, the skills requirements of logisticians.
Mm-hmm.
So see, if you look at center of gravity design, a business looking to expand into a market and wants to look at where should it set up its next warehouse, it's that piece around, well, okay, where does the data tell? How many parcels do we shipping over? How many miles, right? And at what cost? So that then, you take the math, and that tells you you put your next distribution center here, because that gives you the optimum cost and the penetration into these markets, and then people obviously need to go and set up that factory. So you need people who can understand, factory layout, different types of manual handling equipment, automation. How do you specify what's the right one? You take that is, what's your throughput of your warehouse expected to be? How do you factor some in for growth? So what's the right investment? These are questions that traditionally weren't asked of the supply chain people. So I think probably now it is that piece. I think from a supply chain point of view, we're probably where manufacturing was at the kind of advent of CNC machines, where they become more prevalent, and moved away from manual lathes and milling machines into repeatable, bigger scale jobs. And I think you'll see the same there. I think, like, say, the modern supply chain professional, they need to be data literate, understanding of technology, business as well. Do you know what I mean? To be able to build that business case to show senior leaders, or the FD, that this is the right way to spend our money. So I think it massively changes. And I think there's some good work coming around with some of the professional bodies. SILT has a next generation scheme. The IET does a lot of good work, and I think kind of making people aware of logistics now isn't sitting in a porter cabin in a yard full of 15 wagons. It's massive, and as massive. With that comes new opportunities and roles that previously were never in the supply chain.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's fascinating. I think it sounds exciting because we were talking about there is the industry is changing, and I think but for me it feels to me it's changing to be more efficient and more productive, and that is, I think that's great to hear. Why are you so passionate about it, would you say? Because some people just come to work and do the job and go home. You've took upon yourself to work with businesses and want to change businesses. I know congratulations as well. I know you've a new role at Tiger Lifting as GM, and they've seen early doors the advantage to having someone like yourself in. What keeps you motivated now through all this, would you say?
It's just, I think it's a level of involvement you can have. The problem. I've always been interested in the problem solving aspect of it. You know what I mean? And probably what led us into manufacturing upon leaving school. I was always interested in maths and physics, and it's business now is like the application of that. Businesses are changing because of the markets they're able to operate in, the demands of the end customer, the advances in technology, and it's a case of, well, some things that, the main applications were never where they're being used in currently now, and I think for me, it's that impact you can have in an emerging sector. I don't think there's kind of many other areas of a business where you can come in, build a team, ensure demonstrable benefits so early on, and it's big benefits. Companies that haven't looked at how their production processes are coming on, even just having a planner in, right, means that work centers are utilized more quickly. They've reduced the need for overtime, and that's been able them to target new growth. That's massive for somebody to come in and being able to be able to do that. You know what I mean? And the returns on that for businesses are huge. And I think I say that the problems never go away with the best will in the world. We're not going to eradicate something happening in Asia, the US, or whatever. It's about having the people with the skills to be able to navigate them disruptions, to have the least impact on a business and on the end consumer.
Yeah, that makes sense. Perfect sense. And look, I just want to thank you for this as well, because I found it really interesting, because like I think you said right at the start, sometimes supply chain logistics is often the forgotten area of the business. It's just an area of the business people just presume ticks along, but it is so much more than that. And it is the area where you can tackle so many issues, and you can enable businesses to be more efficient and be leaner and meaner. And I think as we're going into a very difficult marketplace right now, where there's a skill shortage, there is massive cost implications for various budget changes, and everyone passing prices on. I think now is the time to look at your processes, and sometimes you have to speculate to accumulate, and it might mean bringing on some automation or a piece of kit. But like you've just communicated during this episode, this is where businesses can be a lot more efficient. And actually, what I found quite fascinating is that manufacturing 4.0, whatever you want to call it, is changing. But I feel like this is really exciting. It's a massive, exciting change, because it still keeps that. What I hate is when people just talk about people being replaced by machines, and that's it. People keep telling me I'll be out of a job in 5 years because we'll be replaced by all this amazing kit and CRMs and this type of stuff. And it will change the face of every industry like ours. But what I can't get away from is you will still want humans and people to interact with that data and that information. And I think that's exactly the same here, where,
Yeah,
you know what I
and
mean?
like I say, it's more obviously, people turn on CRMs, AI will be doing their job in 5 years. There's no need for a recruiter,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Who's going to reach out to who has that relationship, where you've placed somebody in a role 10 years ago, right? You interact on LinkedIn, you're speaking to businesses, you put events on, that's not going that there is invaluable, and you can't replicate that.
Mm-hmm.
You can take some of the data that them things will throw up, and you can put them into a survey, you could put them into this, but what's AI going to do? It's going to throw out a survey, cold call off the back of that survey results, or whatever. It's people to take in that. It's people to take that data and read that data, whether it be in recruitment, whether it be in manufacturing, whether it be in supply chain. There's always people with domain knowledge that's going to be needed. It'll help us work more. It'll help us be more efficient, but it's not going to replace people. It just can't.
I completely
You know
agree. We just need to embrace it and go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where else can we add value now? Because there will be certain tasks in every job which there is now no point in paying someone to do, and that's fine. But those people will be upskilled and will do a different job. And I just see that is the future for me, where we just have to embrace it, or we'll just fall behind. Simple as that.
Yeah, and it's happened. It's happened in agriculture. It's happening in manufacturing and material handling. Do you know what I mean? People were previously manually handling all repeatable tasks. Now stuff comes off the end of a production line, gets lifted with a vacuum lifter and put on a pallet, and the pallet gets taken away on a forklift.
Yeah.
There's still people within them systems. Do you know what I mean? And ultimately, that'll always stay the same. Generative design will help people design products quicker, but there still needs people to design the inputs to take that, to get that product brief.
Yeah.
To understand the problem that the product's trying to solve. Whether it be in a system, whether it be in a recruitment piece, it's still that problem solving piece. AI is only good as its prompt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody needs to write the prompt.
Yeah, and we're still humans who want to talk to each other, not a robot.
Yeah.
Simple as that. So, look, thank you, Ken. This has been great, man. I really appreciate it. And yeah, a lot of people will have learned a lot from this episode. So, thank you, mate. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate you for having us on.
Thank you so much for listening or watching this episode of the Manufacturing Leaders podcast. Please just like or subscribe. It really helps grow the show and obviously improve the industry. If you want any more information about Theo James, as I mentioned midway through the episode, please get in touch with me or the team. I would love to talk about how we can help you directly or your business. We are more than just a recruiter, and I know people say that, but it's something I'm incredibly passionate about. We are in business for much more than just a bums on seats approach. We want to help people grow. We want to help improve their lives. And ultimately, I want to work with businesses and people who share the same values as we do. And that's something I'm incredibly passionate about. So please, if that is you and you are passionate about that dream role or passionate about your people, please get in touch with me or the team. I would absolutely love to talk a bit more detail. Thank you very much. Speak soon.